Hello, welcome to Mandibil. And this should be the last, um, maybe not the last video, but the last series of videos. Maybe just one, but let's see how short I can make it. Um, I'm going to deal with Stefan Molyneux's essay based on, inspired by the discussion or debate I had with him on his show about 4 weeks ago now, I think, thereabout, the big metaphysics debate, as he would later coin it, without my permission, so to say, as if I had, agreed to be in the great metaphysics debate or the metaphysics debate, as if it's sort of a settled idea. But he's just, he swirled it around to his liking and framing it as he saw fit, right? So I wouldn't say it was any kind of decent experience I had being on his show. Rather, I felt abused, basically, and treated like I was some kind of stupid idiot, right? So, but I've been around that in my other deconstructions of the original debate and follow up videos of his on metaphysics. So this should be the last in this series, so to say. And the point is, in this FDR video number 5029, called Metaphysics and Art, the first half an hour or so is about, is the actual essay, which is sort of edited into it, I think, something like that, right? So the first few seconds is sort of introduction, and then we are going into that video. Into that essay a moment later, right? So I have downloaded the audio file in wave form or wave file type, and so there's nothing but my video player here that plays the sound, right? So the production value might not be at the state of the art, right? But this is not about looking pretty. This is about being good at philosophy, right? Okay, so, oh yeah, I just want to mention, as just a side note, I was listening to an old album. I'm a sort of a music collector, right? I was listening to this old album by Bob Dylan. I'm not the biggest Bob Dylan fan. I like some of his older stuff, and a thing here and there, right? But this sort of it's a sort of a greatest hits live, you can say. But what is interesting about this, that these old folky songs and the old stuff he did in the old way, so to say, he has changed all the what's it called? How it has been remade. Well, I'm looking for a word there. Damn, I can't figure it out. But what's it called when you sort of redo things or change the way it's instrumented, and the sometimes it has a sort of what's it called? Maybe I'm brain tired today. I don't know what's wrong, but it's like the versions here, to cut it short, are sometimes quite different from the original ones, right? And I would say if you haven't got into Bob Dylan at any point yet, then this might actually be one way to do it, right? So it's more sort of mainstream than his more sort of progressive stuff from the 60s, you could say. But in other ways, some of the more boring numbers from earlier days are actually spiced up a bit, so they have a different sound, right? Now, I know that there's some mixed opinions about this particular album, that some hardcore fans think that he has changed some of the tracks too much. But actually, I find it interesting when people do things in a different way, than instead of just doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, right? You have to play things the same way, and yeah, we have the original recording and a few live albums where they present it in the same way. Sometimes I think it's a good idea to do it slightly differently, right? So this is an example of an artist which was actually surprising to me. I know that I've had the album on vinyl many years ago, but I didn't really listen to it because I didn't find it. I wasn't into Bob Dylan back then, right? And not that I'm too much into it now, but more, let's say, right? And this struck me as being a different take on Bob Dylan that is sort of unusual, right? So I can, and another side note is that there's actually a guy playing on the album called Billy Cross, who actually ended up a few years later, I don't know if it was on a tour with Bob Dylan, that he ended up staying in Denmark. And he got mixed into the music scene and he became a producer and he was a part of called the Delta Cross Band, and he has produced all sorts of even heavy metal. Pretty Mates, he has produced Pretty Mates, which is sort of a Danish power metal band, right? Or from the sort of some early Def Leppard or something like that, right? So just a side note. Let's get into philosophy.
Well, hey everybody, good afternoon. Hope you're doing well. It is the 22nd of August, 2022. Wow, 22. That's a whole lot of eights. And we are going to eat up problems in philosophy today like you wouldn't even believe. Now, let me tell you something interesting. And this is maybe a humble brag, maybe what. So I look at these problems, I sit down, and I'm able to solve them fairly easily. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm right. This doesn't mean...
Problems. No. There's one thing I would like to say about philosophy. When you do this level of philosophy, the ground floor of philosophy, there's no problems there you're supposed to solve, right? If you think that's sort of it's just a quick fix. Okay, there's this problem and that problem and the third problem, and I have an answer for them. So now I can go and tell you about Orange Man, right? That's not what you're doing when you're doing philosophy. And when you're presenting philosophy, right? If you are a philosopher presenting a philosophy, then you are establishing the arguments you connect or have come to, decided on, that gets you to the problems, right? It's the philosophy that arrives at certain problems that needs to be settled, potentially at least, right? And they are sort of the three major ones, which are metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, right? So it's not like you must arrive at them, or you in my opinion, there's no way around it, but I might be wrong about it, right? But what it reeks of, in my opinion, is that, well, there's these particular little, I can just cherry pick this little problem and then solve it and then done. I don't need to look at that any further, right? That's not philosophy, in my opinion. Philosophy is when you start from the ground floor and then work your way methodically through whatever you need to go through in that philosophy. And I would say it's not even given where you should go or why you should philosophize or anything like that. It might be inherent in what you present to some extent, right? But there's nothing you need to do, basically, right? I know there's sort of, it usually ends up with, these three big questions, usually, right? That has sort of been unsolved in the history of philosophy, and that's why I guess that we have sort of put labels on them and tend to go back and look at them, so to say, right? But that's just sort of a traditional way things end up being. It doesn't have to be that way, right? Maybe if you find some particular interesting avenue through your philosophy, you can avoid these things, right? Just because somebody once said ethics doesn't mean you're forced to do ethics, right? Now, I mean, it may sound a little strange to put it that way, but what I'm trying to get to is I don't like his sort of quick fix mentality, right? So he just have to sort of, when it deals with like Hume's Isord gap, right? Which is also a term that Hume didn't coin, right? But that's what it's become known as. It's just like he throws around a few words and say, because Hume said it this way, he disproves himself and therefore I can go do whatever I want with Hume's Isord gap, something like that, right? So it's fixed, well, out of the way, done, right? That's just too cheap, right? You have to go through. First of all, you have to understand what this dude was saying, Hume, right? If you want to go that route. Another thing is that if you're doing it from the basics, you might eventually get there at some point, right? So it's like you will eventually get to it, possibly, right? So then you'll just deal with it when you get to that point in your philosophy. So right off the out of the gate here, it's again this he tries to come across as extremely confident, right? Telling everybody how great he is and he has just fixed everything and it's just, snap of your fingers and done, and he came up with an explanation, so it's done, right? It's the wrong mentality about what is going on when you're doing philosophy, in my opinion, right? So, okay, I think enough of that.
That I'm so smart, but what it does mean, well, it means three possibilities. Either I am, super smart and able to solve these philosophical problems. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that I'm, mad, vainglorious, deluded, narcissistic, a megalomaniacal person who believes he's solved problems which he hasn't because of an inability.
Okay, so this might be a little trick, right? He's a very smart cookie, right? He certainly has megalomaniacal aspects to him. But he is still so wise that he can talk about it, and what you might deduce from that is if somebody talks about being good to other people and so on, it's sort of inherent in your thinking that you're sort of taken for granted that the person presenting that idea is like that, right? Somebody talking about you could be a very bad person or you could be a megalomaniacal, self-absorbed type of person, then you might think that means that person isn't that way, right? But maybe it's a trick to say, well, you could be mad, right? And that awareness of being able to be mad will take himself out of that question, right? So it might be a sort of a slightly sophist, smart trick to make you think that he's actually not sort of grandiose, while he actually is. But by framing it this way, you are led to believe what he wants you to believe, right? That he's actually smart and a good philosopher and so on, right?
To admit error. That's another possibility and something that always should certainly be on the table. The third is that I'm not particularly smarter than other philosophers, but because I'm willing to go to a blank slate because I've taken lots of therapy and...
Blank slate? Well, I would like to hear his blank slate. I mean, okay, yeah, blank slate is, okay, there's nothing when I start, okay. But what's the first step then after that blank slate? I don't think I have ever heard him, state that. And actually, that was one of the points I wanted to get to in that particular metaphysics debate we had. And he kept leaping ahead to get away from it, apparently, right? I wanted to, no, let's get back to the foundations, right? What are the actual foundations just after that blank slate, where you sort of say, I have nothing, and then I'm going to establish something from that? But I've never seen him or heard him do anything like that. So him referencing the idea of a blank slate, which is also in other contexts something that I think that John Locke was famous for, but I'm not going to go into that because I know not really anything about it. But not just so that you don't confuse the terms, I'm not sure that it's the same way it's used, the blank slate for John Locke and the blank slate in this case, which is sort of a metaphysical, philosophical blank slate, so to say, right? Okay, but then sort of, okay, so he's aware of the idea of a blank slate or a blank starting point from which you try to establish something, right? So why didn't he do that? Why was he not interested in doing that? Or, in a debate fashion, we did. He did shout at me and interrupted me for an hour about all sorts of other stuff than this blank slate, while I was saying, let's go back to the starting point, right? So it's like he sometimes it feels like he's saying something to make it sound like he is that way or does philosophy like that, but he never really does it, right? So it lures people in with words and that he must be very smart or something like that. But when you try to find it or deconstruct whatever is there, it seems like it's just fluff. It's just nothing really. It doesn't feel coherent or well argued or something like that, right?
Done a significant amount of self-knowledge that I'm able to.
So now he says, and that's a very important thing also, philosophy for him is very, very closely connected with his self-knowledge and his psychological whatever he has been doing with psychiatrists and psychologists, whatever these things are called, right? That it's important for him. Philosophy, as I pointed out a few times before, seems to be his self-improvement tool or staying sane tool or something like that, right? And that is also a problem, because if he has fenced himself into some kind of idea, this is where I have to stay to feel normal and safe or something like that, right? Then when you bounce against these walls, he starts to freak out because he's not going with you, right? He's not trying to see if there's something philosophy over there that he might have overlooked because he's afraid to go beyond this line of self-defense, something like that, right? And I think that that's one other point that, and it comes also across very clearly actually in the way I don't want to go crazy. I'm not going. It's like trying to think out of the box might turn him into a crazy person, right? That's a little scary, in my opinion. That shouldn't be a quality sign of a philosopher. On the contrary, it should be a sign that they are too weak in their way of arguing, so they can only say, I'm not going there, right? You're crazy, something like that. And what is the rest of their philosophy built on other than the fear of this other part of potential philosophy that this person has locked itself out of, right? So it's very quickly becomes something that is sort of connecting the dots to your own agenda, right? You're connecting the dots the way you want them to be connected, so it looks like you have this perfect, rational, objective, whatever he would like, kind of realm to be in, right? So that doesn't comes off to me as rigid philosophy, right? It's a kind of manic way of doing philosophy.
Answer questions that other people have emotional blocks to. I guess there's 4. Now, the 4th is that these questions were always pretty easy to answer, but they were inconvenient to people in power.
They were actually easy to answer. Okay. Now, let's say that there are certain questions when people are doing philosophy that seems to keep coming up, and they seems to be always tend to be disagreeing about. And one thing could be the foundations of metaphysics. Is it idealist or is it physical, right? Is it a materialist or a idealist approach, right? And I'm not even sure about these terms anymore because it's like the difference is, do you have direct access to an external world to your mind, or can you only have some kind of representation of that external world, right? That's the difference. Whatever you call it then, okay, materialism, idealism, so on, okay, I mean, it's almost like who cares, right? And within each grouping, there are all sorts of, panpsychism and this kind of analytic idealism, Bernardo Kastrup, all sorts of various versions of this, right? So it can very quickly become complicated, right? And everybody wants to have their own version to say, this is my version. So I don't know, but I have argued a few times for my own metaphysics, and most notably in a video I did about a year ago, I think, called Metaphysics, Idealism Without Woo, and I can, encourage you to go and look at that to get my foundational thinking on this. And I rewatched it recently, and I actually think it's mostly pretty darn good. I can't say it's good. It depends on what you think. Yeah, I can't tell you what you should think, but I'm pretty satisfied with how it came out. And there are only a few things here and there where it might be optimized in the way I put it, right? When I present things, I usually do it from, I'm on the fly. I'm doing it. I'm not reading aloud from something I've pre-written, but I have a few notes or particular words I need in order to get through whatever I need to get through, right? But this was just, from the top of my head, so to say, and I think it came out pretty well. So I can encourage you to go and look at that. I can recommend that. If I remember, I can put it down in the link in the description below here, for you to have an idea of how I actually approach metaphysics. And I'm sure I went out on a tangent here, I think. So I don't remember actually what the actual thing I was discussing from the beginning. Okay, let's head further into it.
If they were answered, right? If the question of the nature of reality is answered relatively simply, relatively easily, then the reason why it hasn't been answered to general satisfaction is that the answer is inconvenient or negative or harms the interests of those in power, in which case people just, like salmon in a swift current, they just kind of line up that way. So I think it's more the latter, and because we have this technology, we have this conversation, and I have the self-knowledge and more than a few brain cells to rub together on the problem, yeah, I think we got it. Bagged and tagged.
Bagged and tagged. Don't be skeptical. Just accept. Well, it's not that strong, maybe, but it is sort of between the lines. Just accept that I've come to these conclusions. He's not a proponent really of, even though he calls it a discussion and so on, very romantic and so on, right? But he's basically just talking to himself, and if there's somebody calling in, just like I did, and he doesn't like the philosophy, then he's going to start to yell at you and interrupt you and frame you and red herrings and strawmen and then mute you like he did with me, and then just pretend that I disappeared or something like that, right? So it's not a discussion, it's not a debate he's going, right? It's an echo chamber.
So I'm going to read this article. And
where he can sort of hear himself talk and then pretend that it's a discussion or a debate. So it's like, from the short period I was on the free domain board with access to what is going on in there, right? It was clearly to me, it was very clear to me, this thing they have got going is not about philosophy. When it comes to philosophy, there's only one who is doing philosophy, and that's Stefan Molyneux, right? And it's Stefan Molyneux's philosophy, and they're just lurking around there in order to say, he's so great. Stefan Molyneux told me that this is the answer, so it must be right because Stefan Molyneux, it's on that level, right? So it's not a philosophical discussion of any kind. It's basically a cult, right? It's very cultish, at least. Very, very cultish. And he's just sitting there sort of between the lines, he's sort of saying, don't challenge my philosophy. You can come and lick my ass and tell me I'm great. Fine, come and do that. But don't expect me to take you seriously or treat you well if you have some kind of philosophy that I don't like, or I consider being a part of those weird people who was out to get him or something like that, right? That's what I read into the way he phrases this.
Happy to take questions, criticisms. This probably not the final version, but it's a pretty darn good start, as I would say. All right.
The Beautiful Truth About Reality by
The Beautiful Truth About Reality. Right? Now, the title alone is stupid, right? There's not a truth about reality. And I don't even say you can say a truth about, right? A truth about, that's weird, right? What's the truth about? It's not the truth about. Either X is true or it's false. It's something like that, right? And reality is that experience you consider either the part that is outside your mind, or you say, like I do, it's a representation of something outside your mind, right? That's reality, or that which is realized. That can't be true, because you need to settle what you mean by that reality in your metaphysics in order to get to epistemology, where you can then point and say that is true because that is what can be knowledge. So you can't talk about truth in metaphysics. It's stupid, right? There's a lot of people who does this. The truth and knowledge, or knowing, or being true, these terms are just thrown around as people you want to. It's like you have to be more strict with your terms, and particularly terms like true and knowledge and metaphysics and ethics and so on, right? How you use them and where you use them in your philosophy, because you can't switch around between these particular areas of philosophy, in my opinion, because you need to do one before you do the next, which you need to do before you do the third and before you do the fourth and so on, right? And there are certain terms you can use in each of them that you can't use before that, because you need to do that next thing before you can get to that use of that term, because that's where they are used, right? So there may of course be sort of diverging, what you call, divisions in how you want to use particular terms. Fine. I mean, it comes down to some kind of settlement of this is what I mean when I use this term, or this is what I'm referring to, and so on, right? There are just things like the term knowledge that you can't use that in metaphysics, right? You can't refer to I know something in, and if I've done that, that is because it's sort of a common language thing that I haven't gotten rid of yet, right? So and this, the truth about reality, right? The wonderful truth about reality. It's also an appeal to aesthetics about truth or something like that. It's completely nonsensical title, right? And it also wants to get under your skin and in the title tell you what you should think, how you should feel, or things like that. It's just sophist in nature. It's like he can't help himself being a sophist, right? He can't help himself. So it's ridiculous, right? And at the same time, he thinks he's just, I'm the greatest philosopher of all time. Why are they so stupid? They can't, these simple things, they can't They must be corrupt and out to destroy your world or something, right? Oh, man.
Stefan Molyneux, host of Free Domain. There is an old saying in philosophy, which is that metaphysics is not a problem to be solved, but a disease to be cured.
A disease. That's the priest, right? Standing there in the bucket and sort of manipulating people's mind into thinking who's good and who's bad and so on, right? And there's an old saying, okay, who gives a crap what old sayings you have heard, right? And if you're not, telling me who said it or a reference to something somewhere and, whoever maybe is a modern philosopher from the early 20th century who said that, I wouldn't be surprised. But maybe it was Nietzsche. He wasn't very fond of metaphysics, right? But why don't you give us some context about, instead of cherry picking quotes that, poisons the well or sweetens the well, depending on what side you're on this question, right? It's still this manipulative approach to things always, right? And it gets more and more prevalent in the way he presents his philosophy. It's always this more or less sort of halfway angry rhetorical thing, the yelling and the raising the voice and using phrasing, tasting the words and doing this thing, right? Rather than try to be neutral and using good arguments in a string of arguments that preferably hangs together, so that you can say, I guess this follows from this. He's reasoning the way, and when he can't reason, he's stating an axiom or making a definition, something like that, right? So you sort of carry through the arguments. No, it's a disease that needs to be rid of the world, right? So he's sort of painting himself into this sophist corner, and I think I might be wrong about it, but I think he's always known he's a sophist, right? He's sort of deep down in his lower layer of his weird psychology. He might actually understand that what he's good at is putting words together in order to get a certain effect in people, right? And whenever you see, he likes this kind of, his books on philosophy is not very good from a philosophical point of view, but when he starts to do these sort of speeches or using words or combining them together in order to get a certain effect, he's actually pretty good, seen from my point of view, because I'm not very good at it, right? But I'm mostly like this, when I get a little angry now and then, but that's just my passion, right? As he would put it. But it's like I don't like it from the get-go. It's fences are up, and I've halfway drawn my sword to fight him off, right?
Metaphysics is notoriously tricky, but eminently solvable. The definition of metaphysics is the study of the nature of reality.
Okay. Who says that's the definition? Why is that the definition? Well, when you philosophize, and from the deepest level, you don't just pull some fucking definition out of your ass, right? You start philosophizing, because when you're doing this blank slate thing, there is nothing. There are no quotes, there are no other philosophers, there's nothing. You have to state your own thinking. That's why I'm always a proponent of philosophy being a first-person philosophy, right? You're philosophizing from a first person. That means you do not have any quotes. You do not have Hume's Isort gap. You don't have Descartes' demon or anything. Because you actually need to go all the way through to epistemology in order to understand those sources where you got those quotes from. And that's what I pointed out earlier. You can't do that, right? That's a circular way of arguing. So when you're doing that blank slate, well, you are in a first person mode where you have to start and say, okay, I'm going with this. I think I'm going with that. Now I'm going with that axiom. So now I think I've established this. Okay, let me go further with this, and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So you're from a first person point of view, right? Because you haven't established any existence of anything, or any beings of any kind, or what it means to argue or understand language, or anything like that. That comes way down the road, right? So he's basically saying he doesn't understand what the fuck he's doing, right?
This naturally begs the question, what is reality?
No, that's you can't. Yeah, it's a weird way of framing it, right? First of all, you can't pull a definition out of your ass and say, from that follows this weird question, what is reality, right? I don't like that definition of metaphysics. It's not a study of reality, because you have to settle what the fuck reality you mean by the term reality, and study, for that matter, in metaphysics, right? Or maybe study comes further down in epistemology, which I will actually think. So he's mixing metaphysics and epistemology in this, the study of reality. Oh man, it's not a study. Study is what you do with a magnifying glass. You're looking at spiders or something like that. That's a study. You can study your stamp collection or whatever, right? That's what you study reality. But metaphysics is particularly not a study of reality. It's a delineation of what you mean by reality and how you get to it, right? That's the closest thing I would say that is metaphysics. So it's completely incorrect. It's stupid, right? And well, yes, let's head into.
Now, there are definitely challenging problems in philosophy, such as the definition of ethics and virtue, and morally appropriate actions in ambiguous circumstances, and so on.
Why are you talking about ethics in some kind of essay about metaphysics, right? That's also stupid, in my opinion. That's like you're just brain farting, right? You're just brainstorming whatever comes to your mind, so you can say, oh, this is very important, this is also very important, and this is important, and this is important. So in order to, cool the water, so people think that you're very smart, right? You are not very smart. You're actually quite stupid when it comes to philosophy, to be quite frank, right? This is awfully bad philosophy.
However, philosophy should at least be able to answer the question that is easily and instinctually answered.
Philosophy doesn't answer anything. It's not something that answers. Philosophy is a kind of thinking that an individual presents. This is my philosophy, you could say, right? It's not that you're so then looking at that philosophy and expecting some answers, popping out of that philosophy. No, it's just the way he frames it. Like it's like philosophy lives somewhere by itself, and he's tapping into it or something like that. No, philosophy has to be created or established or presented by an individual, and the individual has to work from a first-person point of view until they get to epistemology or to knowledge. In my opinion, right?
Answered by every other living being. Single-celled organisms can tell.
You can't talk about single-celled organism before you have established this reality you're talking about, right? So you're talking about things you will establish later. Before you have established that, you need to establish in order to talk about that later, right? It's stupid.
The difference between themselves and others, between food and debris. Insects can navigate from one continent to another, as can birds. And babies can very quickly figure out the difference between themselves and the world around them. Is it reasonable to hope that philosophy can answer a question easily solved by tiny-brained organisms?
What the hell does he mean by that? Just because you can observe some, single-celled small organism, moving around in the soup, doesn't mean that they understand metaphysics, right? I don't get this. I don't get this.
Ethics is a discipline peculiar to human beings, but the need to differentiate between dreams and reality is common to countless creatures who...
It's not about dreams and reality. It's not about differentiating about dreams and reality. You fucking philosophical moron. You don't understand the basic question, man, right? It's this thought experiment of Descartes he's so hung up on, right? That how do you know you're not living inside a dream? And oh yeah, you think you're awake, but you're just dreaming that you're awake, right? Something like that. Get the fuck out of here. That's not what it's about. It's whether that you call it the outside, external, whatever, reality. Do you have direct access to that, or do you merely have a representation within your mind of it that you do, and what it's based on? You do not have access to. This is the philosophical question you need to answer, right? You should be able to get there. If you can't get there, right? Nobody is going to remember you in whatever 500 years for anything you want to be remembered for, right? It's ridiculous. And I think that that's why he thinks it's so easy to answer. I'm experiencing my, whatever, I have my, a bowl of plums here, right? I'm experiencing a plum, right? There it is. I'm experiencing it. There it is. What is so difficult about that? If he thinks that's the problem, to decide whether or not you're experiencing a plum when you're experiencing a plum, I understand why he thinks a crazy kind of philosophy this, right? But that is not the fucking question. It's how you approach that experience while you at the same time, if you do it, claim that there's an external world you have access to in some way or another, right? And how that experience relates to that external world, that is a fucking question you need to get to. And, these 40 years of your perfect philosophy hasn't enabled you to even scratch the surface of what philosophy needs to be done after you realize this.
never need to bother their minds about virtue. In other words, if little brains can solve a problem effortlessly, surely big brains...
Now he has access to other individuals or single-celled organism or rats or whatever, their brain. How the hell does he have access to their brain? And he doesn't even, to their experiences and their thinking and their philosophy on metaphysics or what the hell it is. What the hell is he talking about, man, right? Has he never heard of the problem of other minds, right?
Brains can solve it as well. If a 6-month-old baby can lift a weight, surely an adult can as well. The failure of philosophy to resoundingly answer a question easily solved by your
He just illuminates how ignorant he is, right? He's so confident that there's nothing to see where these people are discussing this inaccessible world, you could say, right? In metaphysics. He's like, they're crazy. They're just crazy. I'm over here being right, sitting alone in my echo chamber, right? Yes, I understand it's a bit of a mental leap, but you should recognize the built-in paradox or contradiction or whatever term you want to use, which I attempted to do in that discussion I had with him 4 weeks ago, or 5 weeks, or 3 weeks. I think it's around 4 weeks ago. I tried to get to it. I tried to help him. Just to, what I was actually hoping would happen, I had a tiny hope that I might be able to actually convince him. Or his mind would sort of click and say, holy shit, man. He's right. Right? Though he wouldn't like to say it, right? He wouldn't like to say that somebody else is fundamentally right on something that is basically the opposite of what he's thinking, right? But what would happen to a dude like Stefan Molyneux if he actually got this point? Apparently he can't get to it, right? He can only yell at people and tell them they're crazy. But what would happen if he did, right? What would happen? Would he sort of sit in his bed or sofa for a couple of weeks, and sort of everything would be turned on his head in his philosophy, and he'd have to go on after a week or two and say, okay, this has changed everything for me. I see it completely different. I can see the point now. I understand it. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but I can see I was wrong before. This changes everything. I need to rewrite my ethics. I need to rewrite my what's it called? Essential philosophy and the art of the argument. Maybe not the art of the argument, but at least the two other, right? Essential philosophy and UPB. He would need to rewrite them because there's a fundamental error or misconception in his philosophy, right? What would happen there? I would like to see that unfold, right? That would be sort of an interesting event. So,
Average B has not done much to enhance the reputation of philosophy. The general perception that philosophy is an abstract and useless discipline that has little or nothing to do with practical life is only further embedded in our minds when we wake from a nightmare, knowing for certain it was not real, and philosophers wag their fingers at us and claim that we have no way of actually knowing that.
But it's not about knowing when you're doing metaphysics. What's the matter with you, man, right? You must understand that you need to have settled metaphysics before you can do epistemology. And you need to also have settled epistemology before you have any definition of knowledge. So you can't talk about knowledge in metaphysics, right? Now, this might be sort of an introductive speech or something, right? But why don't you get to the point then, instead of trying to, poison the well this way in order to, you better come over on my side because the other people are crazy, right? This kind of, it's stupid. It's cultish, right? And it just tells me how bad you are at philosophy.
The vast majority of people have no trouble whatsoever navigating empirical reality. In fact,
no, but again, as I said, it's not about navigating empirical reality. That which you call reality and that empiricism and so on, what is that based on? Well, your experiences. Well, your experiences must be inside your mind then, right? You're not having experience outside your mind. You need your mind to have the experiences. So they must be inside your mind. And your mind, I suppose, is inside your head. And if you're saying you have something outside, then you can't have direct access to it because it must be in there to be an experience, right? So how do you solve that? If you don't get this, you can fabulate all you want from now until eternity about this. You are never going to get the metaphysics correct. Never. In a fucking gazillion years.
to those who claim they cannot do this, who see visions or believe that they can fly, are defined as mentally ill and treated as such. The everyday tools and machines that we use to navigate empirical reality and survive within it are all designed, created, marketed, transported, and sold by people with a full and complete ability to differentiate waking reality from subjective impressions. Try giving a child the idea of candy rather than an actual piece of candy and see how he or she reacts. Even a
Again, he thinks it's about, I'm having an experience of an apple, and then these people are saying there is no apple. And that's what they're trying to argue. Yeah, there might be some crazy people who are actually trying to argue that. But that's not what idealism is about, right? It's like, because he can't get to this point paradox. He can't identify it. He doesn't see the contradictions in what he's trying to say, right? He can't see it. He can't think it, or, he can't get to it, right? And then he tries to explain what is going on with these people arguing this in this fashion. They're trying to elude you or manipulate you or something. He has to have some kind of story about this that fits with what they're doing. And that story is based purely on his own lack of insight, his own lack of ability to philosophize, right? That's why he's doing this. So this essay is apparently going to be him talking about how crazy these people are. Good luck with that philosophy, right?
Butler has no trouble differentiating between the contents of a mind, an idea, and something in reality, a piece of candy. We can only hope that giant brain philosophers can achieve the empirical wisdom of an 18-month-old toddler. The first thing to understand about metaphysics is that it is the study of everything in the universe except the human mind. Subjectivity.
Everything in the universe. Now he used the term universe. That's the first time in this essay he's talking about the universe, as far as I can see. So, okay, if you're studying reality in metaphysics, what are you doing when you're talking about the universe? Is that also that reality you're studying, or is it a subset of reality, or is reality a subset of that universe? Why are you switching the term? It's just because you're too lazy to figure out if you're conflating terms, right? It's just another sign of this is just left-hand writing, right? Where you're so confident that you're right that you can basically write anything you want and not double-check the terms you're using and then think you are creating something spectacular. It's lazy, man, right? And this thing about everything but the mind. But if you don't have the mind, how the hell do you have access? You're pointing to the exact problem then idealists are trying to solve, right? You're pointing to the problem. You are saying it explicitly, and it's so stupid. It's about what is not in your mind. Well, don't you need your mind in order to have anything to think about that reality, right? You need some kind of experience in order to have anything to go with. Otherwise, just pure figment of your imagination then, right? And I don't give a crap about that. So if you're saying it's all about that which is not in your mind, well, you can't talk about something that isn't in your mind, man, right? So if you talk about it, it must be in your mind. And then it can't be independent of your mind. So if you're saying there is something that is independent of your mind, then what kind of access do you have to it? Well, it must be through those experiences somehow. And that's the idealist who will say, oh, I'm just doing catch-all term idealist, right? As opposing to materialism, as Stefan Molyneux seems to be supporting, that your experiences can merely be a representational version, experiential version of that outside, which you then do not have access to, right? That's the only way to connect these dots in a way that makes sense to me, at least, right? And the next thing is, you can't say anything about that. You can say what you want, but that doesn't make it so, right? Because you are an experience machine, you only have experiences. And if you're saying those experiences are based on something outside, that outside you have no access to. You only have the experiences, right? So that's what follows. I would suppose that he will feel like the carpet is pulled out from under him if we would start to think along these lines. It will he will feel like he's starting to go crazy or something like that. And he would quickly paddle back to his safe space in materialism and say, everything is 100%. It's perfect, right? So he doesn't have the balls to go all the way, right?
By definition, is that which occurs within the mind, and therefore is not reflected or reproduced in external reality. You
Reproduced in external reality. External from what? Your mind? As you just... How do you know about these things out there that is not a part of your mind? Don't you need your mind in order to... Right? How do you have access to it? Is everything in your mind, or everything is you, and you have access to everything, right? But if I'm outside your mind, what are we talking about, right? You have to understand this. This is what you need to answer. This potential paradox that you are working from is dysfunctional. You need to address it in order to get anywhere in good philosophy.
may prefer the color red. I prefer the color blue. The objective wavelengths representing red and blue exist in the...
A wavelength is an abstraction. You don't experience wavelengths. It's a model for what is going on, and the model is based on experiences, right? So when you're watching some wavelengths on an oscilloscope or something like that, it's just another experience of colors and sounds and so on. You need in order to get to that, right? Which is an artificial construct that illustrates from a model point of view what is going on. But it's not the real thing until you have an experience of it. You don't understand this. I mean, it's... Oh... It's also, I guess I have sort of a frustration that a dude like Stefan Molyneux, who's supposedly a good philosopher, cannot get this. What is the matter with him, right? I mean, I got it by my own accord after, 5 years of thinking or something like that, right? Then it suddenly dawned on me, oh my God, man, I'm so stupid, right? So...
world and can be measured objectively, but the preference...
Another point is that if his philosophy is incorrect, and he has still somewhat of a big impact on people's thinking, then he is, promoting bad thinking, bad philosophy, stupid philosophy. I don't like that, right? I wanted people to understand how, at least he should point out, okay, there's this problem, as he likes to call them, in metaphysics. Is that the real thing, or is it just an experience of the, quote, real thing? And you need to get to some solution to this. And he could say, okay, my solution is, just like I did before, that it is, merely a representation of, so on, right? And then people could do their own thing. And he would say, well, please do your own thinking on this, right? I might not be right, just like I do. I say, I might be fucking completely wrong. I'm pretty confident that at least I have addressed and identified the contradiction. So trying to get at least to an answer to this must be closer to better philosophy than a guy like Stefan Molyneux is, right?
Exist only in our minds. Now, you might be screaming at me and claiming that I am
No. You're the one screaming, right? You're the screamer. You're the one screaming at your guests, right? Because they apparently you don't like their philosophy, right? And tell them not to interrupt you, and then you start to interrupt because you have found some exception, because then when that exception occurs, you apparently, justify it in interrupting people, even though you made a rule with them at the beginning of the debate, just like we did, where there was no exceptions to interrupting, right? So it's just like you're creating the rules as you go along. Apparently, this is one of many of your sophist tricks in order to get rid of people you don't agree with philosophically, or that you, maybe even worse, cannot argue with, right? You cannot get to that argument where you can refute the other argument or anything like that. You can only say, you're stupid, or start to yell at them and say they're crazy and say, I mute you or I get rid of you, right? It's ridiculous. It's pathetic.
The question or jumping the gun, because I have just casually tossed off a definition of subjective and objective without proving anything. And you might cry that these are all just assumptions without evidence.
But you don't have evidence in metaphysics, right? Evidence is when you have knowledge. Evidence is knowledge that leads to another knowledge you want to get to, right? If you want to see an elephant, right? There are certain evidence that can lead you to potentially get to a place where you can experience elephant. Now, that might be a ferry, that might be an airplane, that might be a jeep or a safari dude or whatever, right? And these knowledges of these things, they are not the elephant, but they are knowledge that is evidential towards elephant, right? But evidence is also knowledge. And you don't do knowledge when you do metaphysics, right? As I pointed out so many times. So it's stupid again.
If you've ever played golf and really worked to improve your swing,
I actually have. Has he played golf? I've never heard him talk about playing golf.
one of the things a coach will do is take a video of you and then slow it down so that you can see every detail of your movements.
I have never tried that, but I know that exists. And they need to slow it down because a swing is performed so fast that you can't really see what is going on.
Slowing down to see the details is essential for improvement in both sports and thought. You are reading this using your eyes or listening to it using your ears. Your reaction that I have not proven anything proves that you have already proven everything. If you say that I have not proven anything as yet, then when we slow down, you'll...
You don't use the term prove either in metaphysics because there's nothing to prove, right? If you want to prove something, you do that in mathematics, for instance. Or you may say, can you prove that this is your bicycle? Yes, I have this certificate, whatever, that is signed by this dude who's a bicycle master, whatever, right? That might also be a proof. That is based on knowledge, right? Proof is not something you do in metaphysics.
Thought process. We can understand that you have fully and completely accepted the following. I exist. I am responsible for what...
I exist. What do you mean I? Do you mean yourself? And your experiences exist? What are you talking about when you say I exist? But what are you... I mean, all I hear is some sounds, right? I'm hearing sounds and maybe I see a bit of a video or something like that. Some colors. But that's all I have. Sounds and colors. Again, right? I may be interpreting them in a certain way because, you know, I went all the way from the blank slate all the way to knowledge and I have my ideas of what is knowledge and what is not knowledge and so on, right? But exist, what is that? What do you mean when there is a color and when there is a sound? That is existence. If I hear sound, if I hear this sound, existence. Or does it have to be a different sound? And does it also have to have a color and a smell or whatever, right? What do you mean by existence, right? This is closer to the metaphysics you need to do. You can't just say, I exist. I exist. I've solved it. Yes, I solved it. I exist. Oh, man, right? I mean, do you really think that you're doing philosophy now, man? Holy crap. Oh, it's bad, man.
I have written. Language has meaning. Evidence is required for proof. The senses operate in an objective manner in this case.
You're just throwing it out. This is the case. This works this way. This works this way. Objective and senses are just throwing it out and say this is how it works, accept it or die, right? Something like that. Okay, this is not philosophy. Please, listeners, right? This is not metaphysics he's doing, right? He's just presenting his conclusions, pretending it to be philosophy, right? Oh, man.
Your eyes reading my words, or your ears hearing them. An objective reality exists that both you and I inhabit.
And the way it exists. It's almost on sort of a woo-woo level, priest level of talking. It's not enough just to be neutral in his way of presenting it. He has to do it and then dragging the words. It exists to create, to elevate it to sort of a, oh, I have to listen, I have to be in the zone of philosophy, something like that. Bullshit, man.
There is more, much more, but these are the most essential facts that you accept in order to both read and respond to my...
A fact, you need knowledge for that also, right? A fact could be this pillow I have here, that's a fact, right? The fact is pillow, right? The fact is not that it's brownish on one side. Brown, it can be anything from, a beaver to a dog turd to a whatever, right? Sauce. But pillow is particular to pillow. Pillow is pillow and that's it, right? That can be a fact. This pillow is a fact. There are no facts in metaphysics, man, right? Because you need knowledge in order to establish a fact. It's on another planet level of stupid, this.
Writing. The moment that you correct me, or...
But what if I don't correct you, right? He's brought up this argument. The moment you correct me, and then he's going to use that as some kind of, establishment of, and I usually use it in ethics to say that, well, I'm right because of your BB. You are trying to correct me, therefore you prove me, or something like that, right? Now he's also using it in metaphysics. Oh, this is bad. Okay, I'm getting a little tired, and it's getting a little dark. I think we will stop here at 8 minutes. That's a big chunk, right? So there's still 2/3 left, something like that. Maybe the last part I don't need to deconstruct. But let's say we're stopping here and, share, like, and subscribe and check out the Discord server. Come along, come aboard and discuss philosophy, real philosophy, right? And chat me up. Come and say hi. See you later.